We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. A real pleasure to welcome back to the program Shaan Sharma. He is a member of the SAG-AFTRA negotiation committee and a member of the national board, and one of at least 8, and Shaan can explain to us, one of at least 8 who voted against ratifying the contract that SAG-AFTRA negotiated with the AMPT. Shaan, welcome back to the program.
Nobody can say it. I think that's on purpose. Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, all right. So first off, just explain to us first why I said at least one of 8.
Yeah, our national board is made up of 70 national board members and 10 national officers, like the president is a national officer. And because we have 25 locals, just like the United States has 50 states, every local has a different population of our membership. So for example, the Twin Cities local, which is North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota, only represents a little over 600 members. So their national board members' vote is weighted less than a board member from Los Angeles who represents 85,000 members. So in the boardroom, my vote is the most powerful vote amongst all of the national board members. Any LA national board member represents far more members than other locals around the country.
We should be doing that with the U.S. Senate, but that's a different that's a different story. All right, yeah. Before we get to why you voted the way you did, yeah. Let's just go over for a moment, like what the elements of the deal were that SAG-AFTRA was on strike for. My understanding is basically 3 major categories, if you will, and correct me if I'm wrong. One was just basically an increase in wages. One was getting residuals from streaming services, which is a sort of a new innovation in the business model of these things. And the third was the idea of artificial intelligence, which in probably more than any other industry at this moment in the stage of AI, is a real threat to the very existence, it seems to me, of of the workforce. So, was those the 3 basic categories?
Yeah, those were like 3 of 5 or 6 that we really sold the strike authorization vote on back in April, May. And certainly the commitment to the membership was to come back with a wage increase that at the very least kept up with inflation, just to keep, our buying power the same through 2026 as it was worth in 2020. There was a demand for an increase in streaming residuals, but that is separate from the new proposal to share in the revenue that these streaming platforms generate off of our work, where we have worked at reduced rates for 14 years to help subsidize the growth of these streaming platforms. And now all we wanted was to meaningfully participate in that revenue. And then the artificial intelligence, of course, is a huge part of this, because the right time to lock up protections, especially around something like this, is when it's in its infancy, not when it's in full maturity, where it's a huge profit center for the companies that are incentivized even more to protect it and to not give us what we need. But 2 other big things were to increase contributions to our pension and health funds, because we had a third of our members kicked off the health plan in 2020 after being sold a contract that promised to keep our health plan stronger, and it was a total lie. And then we also wanted to really improve the working conditions around self-taping our auditions at our own homes, which was necessitated by the pandemic. And so that practice has been rife with abuse and putting both the costs and the labor on the performers around auditioning. And so that was another way that we sold the strike to our members.
So let's go down, let's keep AI for the last one. But yeah. In terms of those 5 or 6 sort of like silos, if you will, how did it come out in terms of, let's say, self-taping and the audition process? Yeah,
so that particular area is one of my areas of expertise, and on the negotiating committee, I was one of the main experts that the committee looked to for guidance on what to do in that space. I'm the chair of the LA Locals Self-Tape Work Group that developed 38 proposals to try to protect our members from abuses in that space. And a few of the things that I even wrote by hand are in this new deal. And there are a couple of things that we achieved that I'm extremely proud of, including a 48-hour minimum turnaround to turn around to self-tape that has to exclude weekends and holidays. So they can't make you work over the weekend and holidays unless you want to, but you don't have to. So our members are getting about 110 days back where they don't have to work if they don't want to. And I'm really proud of that particular thing. But on that particular section, our negotiating committee made a commitment to one another not to allow certain things to happen. And I would love to be able to be more specific, but because of the damage to auditions and self-taping that this language means, we now have to take a legal route that I can't compromise by going in any further detail. So it's one of the main reasons I am a no on this contract is the way it damages the most requested service that our members provide to productions is their auditions.
Interesting. And I can just say, like, one thing I remember is that there was always some stipulation that if you get called back, like it was like the second callback you're supposed to get paid for, that never happened. And people don't understand this dynamic that, like, auditioning is part of the job.
Yeah.
But it is a completely unpaid part of the job. It is, there's not a lot, interviews theoretically are, people go on job interviews but there's far less of those than there are for auditioning. There are times, back in the day, I'm going 5 or 6 auditions, maybe a day, not getting paid for any of that. But that's my whole day. And you've got to take time off of work if you've got a second job and this and that. So that's really, I think, misunderstood by folks as to what big issue there is.
Yeah, and that could be a whole discussion for another time because, it's been in our contract since 1937 that we're entitled to payment for an audition if we didn't book the job as a courtesy payment for the time and energy that it takes to do it. But our members don't know what's in our contract. A perfect example of that is if you have to pay for parking when you're going to an audition, they're supposed to reimburse you. Members don't know that stuff, so they never really claimed it, but it doesn't mean it's there. It's not there. It's there. It's just you only have the rights that you're aware of, really. So increasing contract literacy is a big issue that I'm working on, and so many of us are working on in the union.
And we should also say, too, that there's a dynamic here where if you get a job, particularly when you're starting out, it's like you feel like you've hit the lottery. And so the idea that you would say to the casting director, hey, I want to be reimbursed for my parking when nobody else in the room is doing that, it puts you at least a mental disadvantage. Maybe put you
with commercial auditions. I just had a commercial audition yesterday, and you would go in to audition for a McDonald's or whatever, and sometimes the audition would run late where you're waiting there more than an hour, and you're entitled to overtime pay if they keep you past an hour at your audition. And yet actors are terrified to sign out with their actual time because even though they'll get paid, they may not get invited back to audition again. So, fear of retaliation keeps a lot of people from standing up for their rights. But if we don't push back, we don't have those rights.
Right. And that's why it's so important that when there is a provision that says, it's up to the actor, you don't want that because that's like a slippery slope down to like a race to the bottom at that point.
That is exactly why I have concerns about our AI consent and compensation proposals, but we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. All right, let's go with the pension and health fund contributions. How did that go?
Well, one of the things we can be proud of is that we increased the pension and health contributions on 30 and 60-minute programs in a substantive way for the first time since 1980. So that is a good thing that will bring a lot of money into the pension and health plans, and hopefully enough that the trustees will be able to restore at least the seniors to the health plan that lost their coverage 3 years ago by allowing their residuals to count towards their qualifying for health insurance. That was the big thing that was a real betrayal of the seniors, is that their residuals would no longer count towards the $27,000 you need to qualify for health insurance.
Wow. Okay. And all right, and let's go in terms of wages. Where are we in terms of catching up on the sort of subsidies, essentially, the functional subsidies that actors paid to develop the streaming platforms?
Yeah, so if the commitment was made, and I believe it was, and if we go back and look at everything Duncan and Fran said, the commitment was made that the minimum for us to accept was at least adjusting for inflation. And we weren't successful in achieving that in this contract. We came in at 7%. We went in asking for 15. At the time we went on strike, we were at 11, and we ultimately settled for 7, which is 3 points lower in the first year than we would need to actually adjust for inflation. And I don't blame our union for trying to sell this as a win by the fact that it broke pattern with the DGA and WGA. They got 5% raises in their first year. We got 7. So it is a big deal to break pattern, as much as I think pattern is BS. But the commitment to the members was to keep up with inflation, and that isn't happening, except for background actors who did get a first year raise of 11%. But I think background actors are in the crosshairs of being replaced by digital replication. So for all kinds of reasons, it's easy to give a raise to people you won't need to hire very much of anymore.
And again, that's going to come in the conversation about AI. Yeah. But let's talk about the streaming. It doesn't appear to be residuals per se, but there is a sort of like a mechanism in which actors as a whole get to participate in streaming successes. Walk us through this, because this formula is, at the very least, it's different in terms of the payout, is my understanding, than the WGA and the DGA. Well,
it was, we started out by asking for something very clear, that we wanted 2% of the revenue that these streaming platforms generate off of our work. And that was going to represent about $1 billion a year in new money into our members' pockets. And then we pivoted, after fierce resistance from the AMPTP, to a 1% of revenue share in the form of a per subscriber, 57 cents per subscriber. So then that was when we went out and said, hey, for less than a postage stamp a year, you can take care of our members. And that was worth about $500 million a year. Where we ultimately landed is with a variation of what the WGA got, which is a streaming bonus, a success bonus, that only rewards us if a show is watched by 20% of the domestic subscribers of a platform in the first 90 days that it hits the platform. Now, you and I know that there are all kinds of things these platforms can do to ensure no show ever hits 20% of their subscribers in a 90-day period. They can change the thumbnail, they can bury it off the front page, they can do all kinds of things to they can deplatform it at 89 days. They can do all kinds of things to make sure they never have to pay that estimated $40 million. So we went from $1 billion to $40 million, and that $40 million will have the pension and health contributions taken out of it. So you can take $8 million out of that. So that leaves $32 million estimated. That's if they even have to pay it, which I don't believe that they will have to pay. And then 75% of that will go to the cast of those shows, and 25% will go to a fund that hasn't been seated yet with trustees from both sides, that hasn't decided how it will be distributed amongst everybody else. But suffice it to say that if the goal was to make working in the streaming era and business model sustainable again, $8 million sprinkled across our membership, that really isn't going to get the job done.
And I'm sorry, even if the show is platformed and pushed to the top of the algorithm and it's on the front page, 20%, given like just the amount of shows that are on these platforms, is already way too high of a bar to clear, even in the best of conditions, it seems to me,
absolutely. And it only applies to shows that were specifically made for streaming. So any shows that are moved over from linear television or cable don't count. Like we've been hearing how Suits has been blowing up on Netflix. Well, that would not qualify for this bonus.
Wow. I didn't realize that didn't. I mean,
but you can understand, listen, that when the negotiating committee lost its will to keep fighting, which was a brutal thing for me to see, because our members were begging them to stay strong, they were scrambling to salvage whatever they could. And this, at least, if you listen to Fran and Duncan, gets us in a new pocket of revenue that we can expand in the future. Although Fran can't guarantee she'll be president 3 years from now when we renegotiate this, nor can we promise that that will be our biggest threat and area to negotiate 3 years from now with the advent of AI and so many other things. And so if we couldn't get it while we were striking, what are the chances we're going to get more when we're not striking? So I have concerns that I don't feel like this honors what our members struck for.
I mean, I am sympathetic to the argument of like, we're in the bucket, essentially. And it's really just a matter of next time we'll decide where that bucket floats down this river. But to set up this type of dynamic where this is the weird part about it. the streamers have no incentive to make anything a hit in that way in the first 90 days. They're going to have the content there forever. They could put it on and bury it, for the first, 75 days. And then, the way that we release a show is we seed it for 75 days. We put it in the back end, and then we start doing the campaign to promote it and have the algorithm, push it after 75 days or whatever.
As long as people don't cancel their subscriptions, they have no interest in making sure they ever have to pay that bonus. The other thing that's kind of insidious about this, and I know it was done with the good intention of at least sharing some of that money with everybody as opposed to all of it just going to the cast of these big shows, but it does pit our members against each other because the casts of these big shows are going to say, why are you taking money out of my pocket that I work so hard to be on a hit show, which is rare for any actor to be on a hit show, and give it to everybody else without even asking me, without me having a say.
Right. And that last provision is different from the WGA. I mean, I happen to like it, but I think the problem is that when you make the pie so small, the fights over the slices of that pie become much bigger.
Yeah, the lowest bar that most of us were willing to go was an additional $250 million in some kind of streaming revenue share. We asked for $1 billion, we would have settled around $250 million. But in the final days, we didn't have the strength to stand up for more than $40 million.
Honestly, I think they're sitting in those streaming offices, and it took them 25 minutes to figure out how they will pay out virtually nothing under that formula.
Yeah, and I do want to say, 3 years ago, I was part of the Dissenting Opinion 2020 campaign to oppose the last contract, and I was not a fan of that leadership and that administration. But I can tell you this time that everything was done with integrity. I have a lot of love and respect for the negotiating committee, Fran and Duncan. I think everybody did their best, but I think in the end, the threats and the pressure made them lose steam at the very moment I felt like we needed to be strongest in kind of this back end, the 5-yard line. And I don't think that we exhausted all of our tools or leverage or at our disposal to kind of get what we needed in that moment. But the system did operate with integrity. It's up to the members to decide whether these good people who tried their best is acceptable or not.
And we should say, and I still want to get to the AI, but I think the pressure with the WGA ending their strike, the pressure becomes extraordinary because when the writers aren't writing, there's no after a while you don't have this backlog of content and you can't get the actors in there. But once the writers start writing, there is a couple of weeks before they start to produce some of these the content, and the process can then begin at that point.